Today, we're diving into a really unusual tumor. See, it's not so much about the cancer cells themselves, but, well, about the crowd they manage to attract. This is a story about how understanding one single biological signal completely flipped the script on treatment, from an endless cycle of surgeries to truly precise medicine.
Okay, so the condition we're talking about is called tenosynovial giant cell tumor, or TGCT for short. Now, it is rare, but for the people who have it, it's this persistent invader that just takes over their joints, leading to constant pain and a loss of mobility that could really disrupt their lives.
So, to really get what makes TGCT so different, you have to start with this one question. What if a tumor's real strength didn't come from itself, but from the healthy cells it tricks into helping it? It sounds completely backward, I know, but that single idea is the key to this whole story.
So what exactly is TGCT? Well, it's a tumor that grows in the synovium. That's the delicate lining inside our joints. And while it's almost never life-threatening, it grows aggressively, causing all this pain, swelling, and stiffness that can make just moving around incredibly difficult.
So, how do doctors figure this out? It's a pretty careful process, mostly because it turns out not all TGCT is created equal. The condition actually shows up in two very different forms.
Right, so TGCT is split into two main types. On one hand, you've got nodular TGCT. It's more localized, often just a single lump you might find in your hands or feet. It's way milder, with only about a 14% chance of coming back after surgery. But then there's the diffuse type, and that is a much bigger challenge. It's more widespread, it hits large joints like the knee or hip, and it is far more likely to return. That 5-year recurrence rate jumps all the way up to 36%.
To really see what's going on inside that joint, an MRI is the absolute gold standard. It gives doctors this incredibly detailed map of the tumor, how big it is, where it's spread, and the damage it's causing. You know, this imaging is absolutely critical for figuring out the best way forward.
And now we get to the scientific plot twist. The real story of TGCT isn't actually about the tumor cells. Nope. It's about the crowd they bring in. And this is where the biology gets really fascinating. Okay, get ready for this, because it's pretty surprising. Inside a TGCT mass, only a tiny fraction of the cells, we're talking between 2 and 16%, are actually the tumor cells. So, if the tumor is just a small minority, what on earth makes up the other 80 to 90% of this thing?
This whole phenomenon is called the landscape effect, and here's how it works. Think of those few cancer cells as like rogue broadcasters. They start sending out this really powerful signal called CSF1. This signal acts like a magnet, and it pulls in this huge crowd of immune cells, perfectly healthy cells that just happen to have the right receptor. And here's the crazy part. It's this recruited crowd of healthy cells that causes all the inflammation and damage. The tumor basically hijacks the body's own defense system and turns it against itself.
You can imagine discovering this landscape effect was a total game changer. It forced the entire medical community to completely rethink their strategy. They had to move away from just cutting out the tumor to figuring out how to shut down its broadcast signal.
For decades, surgery was really the only option. But as this quote makes clear, it just wasn't enough, especially for that aggressive diffuse type. Surgery wasn't a permanent fix. The recurrence rates were so high that patients got stuck in this horrible cycle of surgery, recovery, and then it's back. And that just takes a massive toll on a person's life.
And this timeline just shows how incredibly fast things have changed. For years, it was just surgery first. That was the default. But then, in 2019, the FDA approved the very first drug designed to block that CSF1 signal. And just a few years after that, the thinking had evolved so much that active observation, basically watchful waiting, became a formally recognized strategy. It's a huge shift. Which brings us to today. The modern era of managing TGCT is less about finding one silver bullet and much more about having a personalized, multi-part playbook. So today's playbook really comes down to three main pillars. First, there's the wisdom of knowing when not to intervene. That's active observation. Second, we have much more refined surgical techniques for when an operation is truly necessary. And third, we have targeted drugs that can shut the tumor down right at its biological source.
So let's talk about active observation. It might sound passive, but it's a very deliberate, very active strategy. For people with slow-growing tumors who don't have a lot of symptoms, just rushing into surgery isn't always the best move. In fact, one big study found that 64% of patients with diffuse TGCT who were managed this way stayed stable without needing any other intervention at all.
Now, of course, surgery is still a cornerstone of treatment, especially for patients with a lot of symptoms. But the technique really matters. As you can see from this data, for the diffuse type, open surgery has a better 5-year success rate. We're looking at 66%, compared to the less invasive arthroscopic surgery at 54%. The goal is always to get every last bit of that tumor tissue.
And this brings us right back to the biology. For cases where surgery is just too risky, or where you know you can't get the whole tumor, we now have these targeted drugs. They're called CSF1R inhibitors. What they do is they block the receptor on those healthy immune cells, basically cutting off the tumor's broadcast signal. The crowd can't hear the call anymore, so they disperse, and the tumor mass literally shrinks.
And the results from this approach? They're just stunning. The big landmark study, called the ENLIVEN trial, looked at one of these inhibitors, and the results were crystal clear. 39% of patients taking the drug saw their tumors shrink in a major way. And the placebo group? 0. Not a single person. This was the slam-dunk proof that targeting the signal works.
All of this incredible progress has led to this final, and maybe most important, shift in thinking. We now treat TGCT not as a single battle you win with an operation, but as a chronic condition you have to manage for the long haul. So yeah, the goalposts have completely moved. It's not just about cutting out a tumor and hoping it doesn't come back anymore. The real focus now is on maintaining a person's quality of life for years and years, using every tool in the toolbox to manage symptoms, keep the joint working, and control the disease long-term.
And that means building a really comprehensive care plan. It starts with a multidisciplinary team. You have surgeons, oncologists, radiologists, all working together. It means actually listening to patients about how they feel and how they're functioning, not just looking at scans. And it means providing holistic support, everything from regular MRIs to physical therapy and mental health care, to address the full impact of living with this disease.
The story of TGCT is just a fantastic example of modern medicine at its absolute best. By digging deep to understand the fundamental biology, the why behind the disease, we've been able to create smarter, more effective treatments that go way beyond just removing the what. It really makes you wonder how many other conditions are out there, just waiting for us to finally decode their signal.